Hello, everyone. We're just going to wait a little bit until everyone makes it in. I'm going to wait about maybe another 5 minutes to see if we have any stragglers. I know that there was at least 30 that are going to be attempting the exam this coming. So good luck to everyone there. I am going to put my email address in the chat box for everyone that doesn't have it. If you could email me so that you can receive the link to this folder of resources that we will be using today. So that's going to be sciencialearning.com. And so if you just email me, say I attended this evening, please share the resources, or can you share the file? It is the PPR sessions file, and these are the resources that we will be utilizing. And we won't use all of them, but I will tell you where and how I'd like for you to utilize the different documents to best, lead towards success on the exam. Now, some people have taken the exam already, and for some, it will be the first time. And in either or, I like to begin each session with discussing just the type of exam the PPR is. It is a critical reading exam in which content is not at the forefront of the questions or the answers. So it is not about the content knowledge, but your application of pedagogical standards, pedagogical theories, and how you design, implement, adjust, and assess continuously lessons in, to meet the needs of students. EC means early child. That means kindergarten all the way to a 12th. And if everyone would mute themselves, that would be great. If you're not mute, okay, great. So EC through 12 means that the questions are going to cover early child through senior level or almost at adulthood. How would you design for children in early child as opposed to in the later grades? And so the exam is going to pose for you scenarios in which, based on the hints that they give you, and they do give you little hints, sort of like red flags for the correct answer within the scenario, an age group or a grade level is certainly a hint or a red flag that you need to pay attention to, because they are telling you something developmentally about them, that you should take into consideration how to best plan or design or promote learning based on that age group or grade level. Likewise, and the document that I pulled up is your standards. So we have this exam, and it is based on these standards that I have for us here. So this is the document that actually gets sent to the test maker. And if you'll notice, each of the standards, they sort of translate to each of the domains. The only difference between the domains and the testing framework and the standards is that domain 3, which is standard 3, also includes technology and application standards 1 through 7. So I've also included those standards for your reading as well within the folder. Let's take a very close look at the wording that they use, because I was discussing right now about your responsibilities as a classroom teacher, and that's really what this is about, your responsibilities. For this one, it's our responsibility about being a designer of instruction that is appropriate, and we know what's appropriate for all students based on where they are intellectually, their developmental characteristics, varied backgrounds, if they're coming from a place of a lot of like socioeconomic difference or gap, then that might be something to take into consideration in your designing of instruction. But appropriate for all students, EC through 12, wherever they are. And it reflects your understanding of content, yes, so that you have a basic level of content planning. But this other part at the end is very important, based on continuous and appropriate assessment. So what's important to understand about instruction and assessment is instruction and assessment, they're like in a cycle. We don't assess to just say, oh, you get an A or B or C, or you failed this, or you did really well. We assess as teachers, as educators, hopefully many, many times throughout the day through varied assessments, formative and summative. But we assess to drive the design, to see what did the students get from that last lesson. And so even though you're not giving a quiz after every lesson, it's really important that you do a needs assessment to make sure that the lesson was something that worked, that the objectives that you chose and said that the students would be able to do this, this, and that they're in fact able to do those things. And if they aren't, that's when we go back and we make those adjustments. We gauge their success with what we designed. And if it's wanting, if it's left wanting because the students are, failing in any way or not achieving mastery in certain objectives, then we need to go back and make some adjustments. This is really important here, planning instruction that motivates students to want to learn and achieve. And that's one of the big overarching ideas, and you see it play out in a lot of ways on the exam. This idea that students need to be sort of self-motivated, or we need to be able to motivate them. But what science tells us about motivation is that it's very difficult to motivate someone intrinsically without their help. They have to be in on it. It's within them, that motivation. And so we know that the way to motivate students is to include them in the planning, include them in the coming up with expectations, give them agency or action, a loud and live voice in their learning is going to motivate them. For instance, if you're giving a research project and you tell them to list 3 things that they're interested in, and then maybe you choose from the 3 different topics, or you just tell them to straight out choose it, you already have half the buy-in because they already chose it as an interest. So the second step, which is researching and the follow through with everything that goes with that research paper, is going to be so much easier because they are already interested in it. It's not something that you came up with. And so knowing when to utilize student agency or allowing them action in order to motivate them to be lifelong learners and to want to achieve and learn the different standards that we put in. So when a question talks about motivation or talks about students or a teacher having difficulty or trying to increase student motivation, you always want to consider which answer choice is giving the student more agency, is giving them a choice in the learning process. And that's not to say that we would allow students to design a lesson. We would never do that. That would be preposterous. But you could certainly allow them to choose what part they practice the objective on, if it's research, if it's like writing sentences or practicing sentence variety, or coming up with word problems, tell them to choose their favorite animal and write word problems utilizing it. It makes it a little bit easier if the buy-in is there. For instance, a student of mine was having difficulty with math, specifically word problems. And this was during the coronavirus. It was my stepdaughter. And if I found a way to change most of her questions, reformulate them to involve kittens, she just did better. It was ridiculous and very astonishing. But that buy-in, something just clicks in the brain with motivation and attention and interest. And so it's important whenever possible that we know our students well enough to incorporate their interests in our planning and in our design whenever possible. Likewise with the assessments, we wouldn't let them plan assessments, but certainly we can have them come up with questions to be asked. That gives them a really good practice with inquiry and gauging what they know themselves, to have them come up with questions, but also giving students the option to be assessed in more than one way. So for instance, like, instead of having a multiple choice exam, you might have them go up to the board and write it out, or maybe explain something to you, like give multiple ways for the student to show their mastery. That will motivate them, because if they can choose of the assessments, that's their choice. Again, you get that buy-in. So giving them agency, or allowing them to take action in their own learning, is going to be always the way to get students to become motivated in active learning and engaged learning. Do I have any questions thus far? Okay, so I would like to, since we're staying on this, the standards are really important for you to become sort of very familiar with. Standard 1 is domain 1, same as domain 1. And the purpose of domain 1 is for the teacher to design instruction appropriate for all students, special ed, gifted and talented, English language learner, socioeconomically disadvantaged, wherever they are. You have to provide the support through planning and or feedback and assessment in order to get that student to achieve mastery. The way that you read these, and I highly recommend every single one of you very closely read these, do a close reading. That doesn't mean that you memorize. That means that you read them very closely and you ask to yourself, can I explain to someone what is meant by the intellectual, social, physical, and emotional developmental characteristics of students of different age groups? Like, do I know what that means? Now, this includes Piaget's theory. This includes Erikson. This includes Maslow. So everything we know about the growth and development and the natural progression that students go through, and how do we use that to implement effective planning? Everything on the left-hand side is the teacher knowledge. These are things that you should know before you enter the classroom. And again, that's not to say you should have every, level in Piaget's theory memorized, but that you would be able to recognize a student in an age group that maybe was experiencing a transition, or would better learn from a different strategy based on where they are mentally, cognitively, socially, and otherwise. Everything on the right-hand column, and this is sort of like the important column here. And it's important because on the exam, the right answer choice is going to be an application. It's going to be the teacher doing something based on all the stuff that we know from this left-hand column. They will be doing an action, a skill, a pedagogical skill based on the students that they have. They might be, trying to make an adjustment on a lesson plan to increase student engagement during a classroom discussion. And so that's very particular. You have to make that adjustment and know what ways, based on the ones that you're given, would best increase student engagement during a discussion, a class discussion. So everything that is a correct answer will be the teacher doing something from this right-hand column. Planning lessons that reflect an understanding of students' developmental characteristics and needs. This brings us back to that 1.1K over here. You not just knowing these intellectual, social, physical, and emotional characteristics, but making plans in your lessons or in your instructional design that accommodates and that helps strengthen the students' needs, because they are going to have particular needs, and it's our job to assess those or to recognize those before, and in our planning, accommodate for those needs that they might have. Adapt lessons to address students' varied backgrounds. Incredibly important that you try to accommodate or bring in the different cultures that you have, or the diversity that you have within your classroom. Not only does it benefit the student that you happen to be highlighting, or, you know, bringing the cultural sort of prior knowledge to, but you're educating a group of students on another cultural nuance, which is knowledge is power. So making sure that varied backgrounds, skills, and interests are taken into consideration. Far too often, teachers don't like to, or are fearful of including student interests in their plans, but they really should not be, because it gets you that direct buy-in. They're already interested in something, so of course they're going to complete the assignment because they chose it and they're into anime, and so they want to know, or whatever the case may be. It doesn't translate as easy into all of the content areas, I realize that, but even so, even in math, there is some way of highlighting student strength and getting them to feel like they have action or agency within the classroom. In your standards, you have these overarching themes. For instance, this is content and pedagogy. Always utilizing the TEXES, that is the law, it's Texas law, and it is specified very clearly what the student should learn and what they should be able to do. So the knowledge and the skills that they should have when they leave our classrooms. And it's really important, excuse me. Now, you won't be tested.
Sure, I understand.
Sorry, you won't be tested on TEKS, but it's really important for you to remember in your planning, and even sometimes they one-off ask you about the TEKS and maybe like an ARD or the IEP, but TEKS are the law. We must follow them faithfully. Each single one needs to be addressed throughout the year, and that's really important. When you're studying for your content area, one of the best resources that you have for studying is going to be your content area TEKS, and just looking through them, not memorizing them, but like becoming really familiar with the different concepts that the students need to get mastery on, and how they sort of like change with each grade level, how they change in complexity and rigor and whatnot with each. And they do that because cognitively, they're ready to sort of attack more complex ideas, more abstract ideas. Whereas when they're in first grade, they need to do hands-on things and see things before them, because developmentally their cognition has not gotten to a place where they can abstract. And so knowing those things when we're planning is important. Let me see. This is important, demonstrating awareness of common misconceptions, trying to find ways to make it easier for our students to succeed. So if we know that this is a common mistake that students do in math when they're dividing, then we make sure that we let everybody know and sort of give a mini lesson on that so that it circumvents it for them, instead of allowing them to all fall into the normal, what everybody does sort of incorrectly, and then going back and fixing it. Sort of, you know that there is a common mistake, that you sort of address it so that you don't allow it to happen before, and you catch it that way. Selection of instructional goals is the next one. Your goals always need to be able to be assessed. Remember, I said that we don't just assess for any reason, we assess to drive instruction. And so if you have a learning goal, that learning goal needs to be able to be assessed, because what are we doing if we're learning things that can't be assessed? So that is one of the most important things about creation of instructional goals and objectives, is that they should be able to be assessed. whether through traditional assessment or maybe like portfolio, utilizing a rubric, but that we can assess it so that there can be improvement afterwards. Okay. Resources, utilizing your resources available. Your design of coherent instruction. So you have to use the TEKS, obviously. Utilizing resources, and this is something that's important to mention for the PPR, and this is a good place to sort of mention it, because you're not really going to be tested on like a resource question, but they might give you a scenario where the teacher like might need more resources or is lacking in some way, and that's never going to happen on this exam. You are always going to have a selection of the most amazing instructional resources to support the learning goals, because the PPR is a theoretical exam. So in theory, you should have everything you need to select instructional resources that support the goals, enhance student achievement, and engage student learning. Now, the trick to choosing the best response is always going to be for these type of resource questions is that no one should ever go without. It's never going to be a situation on the PPR where someone is going to go without, or there's going to be no way for the teacher to supply limited resources. If we have it in our design, in our plan, then that means that the teacher must provide it for them and the school. So any question that has students like missing out, or like some people don't get to participate while others do, that's never going to be a correct response. It's always going to be the one that is sort of best case scenario. Utopia ISD, we just go down to the technology department, they gave everybody laptops and now we're good to go on this distance learning assignment. It's never going to be that you're unable to do the assignment, some people, or that you would have to change the assignment from the original goals, learning goals of the teacher. That's not going to happen either. So we want to achieve the learning goals of the teacher using the myriad of resources we have at our disposal in this theoretical exam. So you're always going to also have more positive sort of responses. And we'll look at the verbiage in some of the practice questions in a little bit. Now we get to the assessment. This is a big one. So this is everything we've looked at right now has been domain one. We've looked at standard one, but standard one is domain one. And so now we have this assessment of student learning, which is equally as important as the design. It drives the design. And we want to utilize a variety of assessment methods, including technology now that we have that available to us. And remember, I said we want to give the students a choice. So having a variety of different assessments available, even on the same assignment, is something that everyone should consider, because it gives the student agency. They get to choose from the assessments, which will I shine better in? Like, what way will I show my mastery better? So communication is really important all throughout the PPR and obviously throughout teaching, but it's really important, especially when you're communicating the expectations or the standards of your assessment. Because when a student is going to be assessed, you have to let them know what it's going to be over, like what standards or criteria am I using to assess, if you did well or not. And it doesn't have to be an assessment that's like a summative assessment that takes place at the end of this huge unit in summation, and then I only give criteria there. Even when I'm giving a group discussion, I'll tell them at the beginning, I'll say, okay, guys, when I'm walking around, I want to be hearing you talk about the tone, and I want to hear particular diction words. Like, I'm letting them know the expectations, and I'm going to be informally formative assessing them as I walk about the room while they're in their cooperative learning groups. But I give them a very clear indication of how they will be judged on that day as far as successful or not. And that's something that the students need all throughout with all of the assessments that we give them. Like, what are we looking for? How can you shine? What's the measure? We always want to try to incorporate real world experiences or real world, applications. So if you can design, whenever possible, assessments that would have the students sort of be able to reflect back to the real world, that's good. We always want for our lessons to be able to be tied. We don't want for learning to be taking place in a vacuum. Like I'm teaching you about biology just because it's something we do in school. No, it's important because you need to know about like reproduction, the way things work. I mean, you need to know science. There are reasons why we know this now. There's some people who don't understand the workings of science. And as an adult, even after you leave, there's a reason why we need for you to understand the way that vaccines work and the way that cells work and immunology. And so, being able to tie back the TEKS to something that is applicable into the real world solidifies it as something that's necessary for them to keep. And if it's something that's in isolation, like I'm only learning this in this room because it's Thursday and I have this class, then it's something that's more easily disregarded. So by making it real world application, we give them something tangible that, that they can keep. And likewise on the assessment, it strengthens it for them as well. This next bullet, really, really important point to bring about. And I'm actually going to make a list of like the high points that need to be remembered, but this is one of them. Promoting the students' use of self-monitoring and self-assessment. The students' use, not putting them in pairs and letting them grade each other, but having the student reflect on and monitor their own learning. And the word that defines monitoring your own learning is called metacognition. And metacognition is kind of one of the buzzwords for the exam that sometimes makes an appearance. Meta is you and cognition is thinking. Metacognition is just you thinking about your thinking. And it's important to know the strategies that promote metacognition, because that is the way that you will be asked about it. They're not going to say like which one of these metacognition strategies. I mean, they might, but probably not. But self-monitoring and self-assessment and activities where the students have to self-monitor, that is an activity in practicing metacognition. So getting them to write a little summary or like maybe 1 or 2 words theme after each paragraph that they read is metacognition, because they have to reflect back on this paragraph I just read and come up with a couple words that would sum it up. Okay, well, this was about water bugs. Okay, water bugs, and like life cycle of water bugs or whatever. But they have to think about it. And if they didn't get it, then they'll have to go back and read it because they won't be able to complete the little, and sometimes they do need help and they don't understand. So getting them to practice rereading things that they've already read and really to come up with their understanding by, making notes, jotting notes, annotating, self-assessing their work in like group work, in regular exams, like setting goals for them in the beginning of the year and then having them monitor those goals throughout is a great use of metacognition to see if they are actually, and then have them, fill something out where they would have to say like, why didn't I achieve this goal by this time that I said, and what things could I do to change that? So getting them to think about their thinking and think about their progress, so incredibly important. And we see it a lot of times on the exam. We see this, the teacher, giving them an opportunity or what would be the best way to get the students to progress. And a lot of times having them monitor self-assessment is a really great way of having them progress and think about their thinking. And it does a little bit have an effect on their motivation if they can see the progress, and if they came up with learning goals themselves, and if they're not achieving them, they're not failing me, they're failing themselves. And so it has a little bit more of that buy-in. And if they're looking at themselves, I mean, they can lie to themselves, but in their head, they still are assessing. And so it does help with motivation and getting the students to to achieve a little bit more when we get them to think about their thinking and think about their progress themselves, not just us telling them, okay, well, this is where you are. Okay, cool. I don't have to think about it anymore after you said this is where you are. Can totally shut you out. But if I have several like assignments where I'm thinking about where I am and I'm having to reflect and I'm checking on my understanding of things, then it's not something that I can just, ignore and continue to feel sort of like failing in it. I'll have to make those movements. And the students, they do, you see that they do, and they start to understand themselves a little bit more as they get better at that self-monitoring. Let me see. So standard 1 and standard 3 are the most heavily weighted standards. They make up domain 1 and domain 3, but standard 3 is not all that we see in domain 3. We have standard 3, but we also have standards 1 through 7 of your technology applications. And I'm just going to show that to you really quickly. Okay, so here's this folder. We have the PPR standards here, and here is your technology application standards. And it's going to be standards 1 through 7 that all Texas teachers are required to know that, again, that this does not mean that you need to memorize these. In fact, I highly recommend against it, but I do want for each of you to at least read through it. And if you see words that you're unfamiliar with, just Google them. Just, if it's like a techie thing, a part, you're not sure like what that means, just Google it and then move on with your life. There's not a whole bunch of technology questions, but there are some, and these standards 1 through 7 are in domain 3. But the bulk of domain 3 is going to be you implementing the design in order to achieve student success. So the teacher is promoting student learning by providing responsive, and responsive is an important word. That means that we are giving feedback, and our lines of communication and our techniques are on par with making the instruction responsive to the student's needs. So providing responsive instruction using effective communication techniques, instructional strategies that actively engage students in the learning process. So actively engaging them, and we know what does that best, and that's by including them, making sure that we're taking into consideration interests in our planning, in our execution. This last part is really important, and feedback kind of gets lumped with assessments. It's not really an assessment. Feedback is the fruits that grow progress for the student. And it's really important that we give them timely feedback, that we don't wait 2 weeks after they've written an essay to say these are the problems that I saw, or after their speech, or a coach wouldn't wait a day or 2 days to tell them what was wrong with their dribbling form. It has to be high quality feedback, not like, oh, good job. That's not feedback. That's just you saying something. Feedback is, I love your transitions, but you have a couple of
could you say that again?
Comma splices. So let's work on revising those 2 sentences. So that feedback allows them to make changes before assessment takes place that would really highlight their learning or their potential. And so feedback is really important in the learning process, in the instruction process, giving them timely, which is in good time, and then good quality, that you're not just saying things like well done or nice try, that you give something that is of content and will actually lead to growth. So in the knowledge section, we have spoken written language that is appropriate to student ages, interests, and background. So again, with the interest and the background, it's really important that teachers have strong communication skills with their classes. And communication is not just what you say, it's what you don't say. It's, the nonverbal communication, and it plays a big part in instruction, because we have to think of the psyche of the students. And when they're learning, yes, it's not a high stakes situation, but nobody likes to fail or get things wrong. And so just sort of paying more attention to the nonverbals so that they don't seem discouraging when we're frustrated and those type of things, but having a clear communication that allows students to understand the expectations that you have for them in the class and in also the assignment. So communicating directions, explanations, procedures clearly and accurately. In early child, and this is important for those of you taking the PPR that don't really work with early child, because procedures are really important as far as classroom management and just as the flow of the classroom. The students come in, they grab their journals, they have a seat, or whatever the case may be, but having that practice, those clearly stated expectations and that practice in the procedures from the beginning helps alleviate problems. And we always want to be able to give the students oral and in writing communications. So whenever you give directions to an assignment, certainly you're going to have them written down, but then you're going to not only read what you've written, but elaborate on those ideas with communication that helps them, get a better understanding of what they're supposed to be doing in your assignments. Questioning is one of the communication sort of standards that's really important. Making sure that we're asking open-ended questions, like thoughtful questions that will foster student inquiry, that'll get them to ask more questions themselves. We want for them to be doing higher order thinking skills, not recall. We want for them to be using their imagination and their prior knowledge to come up with new ideas together. So for your homework later, I would like for everyone to read over these and pay special attention to the right-hand column, but also make sure that you feel very strong in standards 1 and 2. And by strong, I mean that you can explain to someone, okay, well, this is what standard 3 is all about. It's about your instruction in the class, your responsive instruction, and you promoting learning. So a lot of times when I want to be solid in my understanding, I'll read something. If I don't understand it, I will Google it to get ideas, but I'll also sort of restate it in my own way. Just like I said, we have the students do at the end of each paragraph, rewriting it in your own words. So for 3.1S, the teacher has to be excellent with her communication of directions, explanations, procedures, and they have to be delivered both orally and in writing in order for the students to be able to refer to it later and for communication to remain clear after you stop talking. So that's a lot longer, but if you can explain it to someone and say it in a different way, then you know that standard and you'll be able to recall it, and your brain has made a neural pathway that you'll be able to access during the exam. So for your homework later, I would like for you to do very, very close reading to all of the right-hand column, but with special attention where you're sort of restating things in your own words to standards 1 and 3, because they make up the bulk of your exam. And typically they are the ones that give retesters or testers the most difficulty. That's where people have the lowest percentage passing there. Okay, the next document that we're going to take a look at is, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but it is the cheat sheet. And this is a very terrible sort of like copyright infringement. It's not printed anymore, so it's not copyright infringement. As long as I don't charge you for this document, it's no big deal. But it's the last remaining Dynanotes TEKS study guide. And it's really great because it cuts up the 4 domains, the 4 standards. The first 2 on the first side and the last two on the second side. So here you have Piaget's theory of cognitive development. Remember, you don't have to memorize, operational and be able to say that, but you do have to be able to recognize when a student is in the pre-operational stage and how you might support them better with your either design or implementation of your lesson. So reviewing of this would be really great, especially if you're not super solid on your theories, Piaget, Erickson, Kohlberg's, those guys. But it's a really great cheat sheet crash course on pedagogy. Wait time, extending wait time, incredibly important for ELL students. But also science says that extending your wait time allows any student, English language learner or not, the ability to come up with a better, more thoughtful and meaningful response. So extending that wait time is always going to be the best course of action when you want the students to give you more meatier and thorough responses. And if you're trying to get responses from ELL students, increasing that wait time is going to help the student come up with a better response for you. On this backside, I'd like to bring your attention to the Bloom's taxonomy section. And there's a little bit of a change because this was printed in print so long ago. I think it was like 2008. That scholarly thought has changed. And actually, evaluation is not the most critical of thinking. It actually, it actually is synthesis. So evaluation is actually in between application and analysis, and analysis and this synthesis are moved up. So you have knowledge, comprehension, application, evaluation, analysis, and synthesis. So in any event, the three highest are still remain the same, but the highest of all is synthesis. Anytime they're designing, creating, composing, any creation, student creation, where they're designing, composing, writing, creating, that is going to be the height of critical thinking, the highest. And what's important when you're studying for this exam or you're, looking over these ideas is that they're not going to ask you, which one is the least of critical thinking. They're going to say, Miss Salceda wants to increase her critical thinking in her English language arts 8th grade class. Which of the following assignments would best achieve her goals? And there'll be assignments, and these here are where you find the assignments written. So if I tell you, define the stages of mitosis, you might think, ooh, that's fancy, but it's not critical thinking because it's still just you defining. You're just defining it. Now, if I have you create a model that shows mitosis disturbed or whatever, then that is higher thinking. You're having to create something. So summarizing, not super high on complexity. Explaining, demonstrating, constructing, solving, those are going to be lower as far as critical thinking tasks. And the way that they will ask you the questions is going to be based on tasks, these different tasks. The students criticizing, that's still high order thinking. But if it's criticized against design, design wins out. So you need to remember that the highest of all is that creation, where you've already judged, evaluated, analyzed the different parts, but then you went and you synthesized it, you created something else. That is always going to be the highest as far as critical thinking and complexity and inactivity. Okay. We have instructional models. Inquiry is where you ask questions and you let the students, you come up with these poignant questions. It works really great for science classes, and it can work in all classes. It just takes more on the planning end, and the students have to, ask themselves questions, come up with new questions, and it leads their discovery they're learning in a discovery way. And that's sort of like discovery learning as well, where students actively explore and develop skills as they question and through discovery. But we don't get a lot of that in public schools. Most of the time we see direct instruction, where the teacher, directs and guides the students learning through these lessons. However, the state of Texas and just education in total knows that that's not the best way sort of to get your students to thrive, is by doing direct instruction. And so we do direct instruction for sure many things, especially if we're introducing a new idea, but we make it like a mini lesson, and we break it up with different activities and checking for mastery and different practice, giving them independent practice and allowing them to apply any new skills that they have learned, to sort of break up the monotony of the direct instruction. Lecture, again, is direct instruction. What a lot of people use, and I'm just so glad, we have a lot of simulation and role play in the classroom, and it works so incredibly well to get the students to bring to life and highlight what they understood. It works well in ELAR, it works well in like math classes, and role play and simulations and using sort of scripts sometimes helps teachers when they're modeling things where it takes more than one person to model what's done correctly. For instance, if you're giving, expectations on how to work effectively in a cooperative learning group, then you might give, the different groups a different simulation or a different script, scene, and different scenarios of speech take there, and the students discuss what worked and what didn't. And so that helps illustrate a point that is more difficultly made when it's just the teacher trying to explain, okay, I need you guys to be talking about these things and not these things. Whether you come together with a script and allow the students to role play and live in it, then they get it better, and it just comes across as a fun experience for them. Bringing us to assessments, really important that you understand the difference between formative and summative and how we use them. So formative, so a little trick to remember your formative and summative is formatives form or drive your design or your plan. They help form. They take place before and during the actual learning. So if I'm doing a unit on Romeo and Juliet, everything that takes place before and during the learning up until my last exam is formative. Pop quizzes, my observations, my conversations with them, their exit tickets, their essays, their small paragraphs, their journal entries, all of that helps form. It's me gathering data on my planning and if it's working, because if not, I have to make moves or changes to the plan, the design, or even the implementation in order to help them progress. Now, at the end of my unit, in summary, in summation, I would give a summative, and that's after all the learning has taken place. We're done with this unit, and I want to see how you guys did. This summative exams are not used to like, where can we go now? Not really. Formative, we do. It's like, where can we go until the next time? Summative is like, this is what we got out of the process. This is what we learned. We see summatives are more formal in nature, structured exams, projects, portfolios. And if they're project or portfolios, then they have to have rubrics that clearly outline or state the expectations for mastery and the expectations for failure, or like, reasons for failure. So summative, it's always going to be formal. You're not going to have an informal summative exam. That just doesn't happen. But your formative exams, they can be both formal and they can be informal. So it can be less structured, and it can just be, I'm walking around the classroom and I want to hear you guys talking about tone and diction words. Like, I want to hear tone words and diction. So that's what I told them. And as I walk around, that observation or that, them listening to them, that's my formative exam, if they understood tone and how diction helps us, identify tone. if I hear everybody not getting it, then I have to go back to the drawing board. We may have to look at another piece and together identify the tone so that they get it. Or I can give them an exam, or I give them pieces and I have them highlight the diction and identify a tone word from a multiple choice. It can be either. It's up to me, and it would help form or drive my plan for learning for the students. Do we have any questions so far?
No.
No, ma'am.
Okay, great. So I'm going to let you guys take a look at this. It's really dated. I mean, I started teaching in 2003 and I was under PDOS. That was the appraisal system that the state of Texas used. They don't use that anymore. In fact, not everybody uses the same one. Now there's T-test, and some districts have their own appraisal systems that they use. But the state recommends T-test. So some of these things are like no good. Like this right here is not really that important. But other things I would definitely tell you just to go read through this. Just make sure you're familiar with, you know, thematic curriculum, and that you go through some of those theoretical, like developmental theories, the development theories, and that you're familiar with those so that you can utilize them to adjust learning on the exam. Okay. Before we look at some questions, I want to bring your attention to this little gem. Now, on the PPR, you're going to have questions concerning English language learners. And the bulk of those questions are going to be about beginners and intermediates. And the reason that is because they require more linguistic support than your advanced and advanced high students. And this document is really great because it gives like actual teacher supports that you can do in the different areas of English language proficiency. So listening skills, speaking, reading, and writing. Really great information in the entire thing, but I'd like to direct it sort of for your studying purposes to page 22, I believe. And that's where you have, those are the descriptors. Up here are the descriptors. But here you have this really nice, like this is the listening. So it sort of tells you what a beginner listening is, beginner, intermediate, intermediate listening, advanced, and so forth. But this is what's really nice. You have classroom activities that you could actually do with a beginning ELL student to increase like listening skills. Teacher supports that you could do to increase listening skills. And then the student outcomes that we would, like to see after providing those supports. And so it goes through each of them. And the particular things that you need to do in order to be supportive for both beginner and intermediate. And those are the most highly tested. So this is a document that I would like for everybody to take a look at later on. Really become familiar with the different things that you can do in each of the areas, because they try to trick you and they'll say that you're helping an ELL student. But if you haven't identified the goal for the teacher in the scenario, and the teacher's trying to increase listening skills, and you choose a really great strategy, but it's for speaking, then you got it wrong. Even though it's a great strategy, it's not going to help with the listening goal. So identifying the goal for the teacher in the scenario is really important. So you also have these strategies. This is also a really great document just to look at ways in which we support students that are ELLs, utilizing an anticipation guide. And these practices, they're not just best practices for ELL students, they're literally best practices for everyone. An anticipation guide is kind of like a preview to the lesson that you're going to do, just giving a little preview, little bites and pieces to the different things, key concepts that we're going to talk about, giving them an anticipation to what the learning, preparing them for the learning experience, maybe giving them some vocab, showing them a video, in order for them to be prepared for the learning experience, more prepared for the learning experience. So here's an anticipation guide examples. So this is really great for just to look at the different strategies that we utilize for ELLs. And like I said, best practices for ELLs are always best practices for everyone. It's that extra support, and literally everyone could use a little extra support. Okay. So I would like to go over some questions. I guess we'll utilize this one. We'll use the beginning of this for a little bit, but I don't really like the questions on here. They're not that great. Okay, so reading the question carefully is really important. Remember that this exam is a critical reading exam. So the words that they choose, they're specific and on purpose. Particular word choice. If they tell you for the best strategy during the lesson or during the activity, then make sure that the answer is during the activity. If it's before the activity or after the activity, it's wrong. And that one word during makes it what's wrong. So it's a very word exact exam. Reading the scenario carefully is really important. Asking yourself, what is the goal of the teacher in this question? Like, what is their goal? Is it to increase student engagement? Is it to increase critical thinking? Is it to like make an adjustment in classroom management? Frame that never-ending question in your mind as you're reading the scenario. What is their goal? Like, what is the goal for the educator in this scenario? Making sure that you have the goal articulated in your mind is incredibly important, because your answer choice has to support that goal, or else it can't be right. It can't be right if it doesn't support the goal, even if it's the best strategy on the planet. If it doesn't support the goal you identified, then it's not the one for you. Find the clues on how to answer the question in keywords and phrases. So remember, I told you to pay attention to grade level or age group. If they say a grade level, it is because they want to give you a hint as to where they are cognitively, emotionally, and physically. And that information might be pertinent to what you're going to do for the designing of the lesson and for the adjustment of the activity. If they give you a special population or they mention a special population, rest assured that they're telling you that, to give you some sort of extra, to tell you, okay, you might need to do something by way of accommodating this particular group. And that includes your ELLs. And there are some things that we all know must be done with our ELL, beginner and intermediates. Like, you have to do constant needs assessment. You have to be checking for understanding, because your beginner students don't have the language with which to even ask or to say, I don't understand, because they didn't even understand what they were listening to. So checking for understanding is going to be key with beginners and intermediates. Direct instruction of any new vocabulary, especially if it's academic or content vocabulary. It's got to be direct instruction. And to be honest with you, with our ELL students, everything should be sort of direct instruction, and then get put on a word wall or get attached to its like actual thing on the wall. Like if you defined what a pencil sharpener was and you put the definition next to it and the name, but getting them to build a bank of words. And that happens through not only interaction, organic interaction via communication with the teacher and the classmates, but through direct instruction of new vocabulary. Got to happen. Always the best choice for ELL students. making every opportunity for the students to be able to practice their listening and speaking skills. That means that you're not just standing up there and just like direct instructing the entire time. That leaves no room for practicing. And they've only listened to one person talk, and people say things different ways and have different pronunciations. And so everything that they're hearing, the way that people pronounce things, they're watching and listening. And we need to give them a myriad of models to listen to speaking native English. We know that group work is incredibly helpful, especially if you have assigned sort of like a tandem buddy, a linguistic buddy, if you will, the class buddy that speaks their native language and English language, so that they can be another sounding board other than the teacher. And oftentimes we find that the students, are less, obviously, less intimidated to ask their little class buddy that sits next to them, hey, ¿qué dijo? ¿Qué vamos a hacer? Like, instead of asking the teacher in front of the entire class. And so it's really important to have that support system there, to have someone help practice, and someone who can speak the language. It's not always possible. There are so many different languages that teachers have to support in Texas, from Mandarin to like Swahili, and just a lot. So it's not always possible to have the class buddy, but whenever possible, we insist on having that. And then again, that constant monitoring of the needs and assessment. Okay, guys. I thought we were no questions. Yes, we are gonna meet again at 6:30 tomorrow to begin with the questions. Everyone is invited to come back, and everyone will receive access to the file folder, so that we can go over them tomorrow. You guys could take a closer look at the standards and go through the different strategies together. Let me see, what in the world? Sorry, guys, I don't know what happened. So let me see, how many do we have in attendance tonight? Okay. Okay. So, let me bring this up really quickly, because it's a very nice visual of the direct instruction and student centered. We want for our instruction to be student centered. So here, this is more like traditional direct instruction. I'm directly, the teacher is like, the knowledge and experience is coming one way, and here's the class of student, and they're like meant to absorb it. That's not the way we know learning takes place. And the way that a classroom climate is like thriving is going to be where the knowledge and experience and beliefs are sort of like, they come from all around. And the teacher is not this like all-knowing person, but sort of like the mediator or the manager of the information. But the individual students collaborating with the teacher helps knowledge and further success. So this is what we want to see as far as lesson planning, more student-centered learning. Okay, so did everybody get my email address to gain access to the file folder? If you haven't, please do. I wrote my email in the chat right here, slseda@sensialearning.com. And if you'll just email me, I'll just send you the file folder. And tomorrow we'll begin at 6:30 with the TEA manual test questions. We'll take a look at some of those and we'll go through the questions. We'll ask ourselves, what is the question asking? What is the goal for the teacher in the scenario? Identify any keywords or phrases that we need to pay special attention to, and then, try to work from there. So I will see everyone tomorrow at 6:30. It was a pleasure. I'm pretty proud we got through all of the big stuff today. So I'll see you tomorrow and we'll just get started on the questions. Thank you.